different platform long ago.
It was a long time ago, I feel like.
How do you guys know each other?
We're both in tech law.
Yeah, we're both law professors.
Yeah.
We all know each other.
All law professors know each other, Scott. Oh God, we're live. Okay, sorry. It is Wednesday, April 13th, 5:04 p.m. Eastern Time, and we're not allowed to have fun anymore, and we're not allowed to have any type of professionalism because I'm running the show today. And so instead, we have Blake Reid coming to us live from Colorado Law School. Blake, welcome
from flyover country.
From
nice
flyover
to be
country.
with you.
It's so nice to be with you. Blake is actually calling to us from his parents' basement, where he has lived for most of the pandemic. No, I'm just kidding.
I feel like I have a parents' basement. Like, this is a parents' basement. It's not my parents' basement.
You just kind of look very teenager-esque and kind of like gamer-esque with like, you're kind of fitting the tech law like meme. You got like your headphones, you've got your hat and like your really thick glasses and like your hoodie. And so like, honestly, you could be like 22 for all I know. And like, you could be a dog.
That is what I'm aiming for. I'm glad I have that stereotype. I feel old, so this is nice to know that's not what's coming across.
Anyways, I wanted to, so Blake and I have been part of a really fun content moderation small workshop. We spent a lot of time together in the last couple of months, kind of like working in this workshop. And Blake has opened my eyes to a ton of really important tech accessibility and just accessibility and disability law stuff that I was not aware of. And it has been a tremendous learning experience for me, including the fact that he sent me right before we came on to the show, a link to Crowdcast, how to enable closed captions in the Crowdcast thing. And I'm like, holy fuck, how have I never done this before? I'm such a jerk. Also, I am such a sucker for closed captions because I have bad hearing. And so I can't ever, like, I always have to read everything to understand what's going on. So like now I'm going to do this and permanently enable it. So this is like exactly the type of thing that I'm so glad. And specifically, I will say that there was one recent current event that happened yesterday, which was the horrifying shooting in Brooklyn. And one of the things that kind of came out of, one of the minor things that came out of that was that shooting, which was 2 miles down the road from me, in a subway station. One of the things that people were commenting on, and I retweeted this, was Justin Hendricks said on Twitter, basically like, can you imagine the stampede that happened and if you were in a wheelchair and if there was no like kind of elevator that was enabled, like, which is frequent in a lot of, they will run shuttles between subway stations, but a lot of the subway stations are not handicap accessible. And it kind of just got me thinking about Blake and his work. And so I thought it would be a really great moment to bring on Blake and have him talk about the clinic. He's a clinical professor of law at Colorado University. And so like, take it away, Blake. Tell us about kind of how you got interested in disability law to begin with, and then tell us what it looks like to work from a clinical perspective in that.
Yeah, for sure. Well, it's a strange path. I think a lot of folks who work on disability law have a really deeply personal connection, have a disability themselves, or identify as disabled, or have a family member who identifies as disabled, or a close friend, that kind of a thing. And the reason I got into it was I started a clinical fellowship right out of law school down at the First Amendment and Media Law Clinic at Georgetown, which is now the Communications and Tech Law Clinic that my colleague Laura Moy runs, who is super fantastic. And it's a cool clinic. It actually has these roots back to doing communications law, back to the civil rights era, back to the 1960s. And so this clinic sort of got its start in the part of the civil rights era advocacy to make sure that systemic racism wasn't being perpetuated on TV or starting to address systemic racism on TV. So there are a lot of TV stations that would deny Black candidates, for example, access to buying advertising, or cut to cable trouble every time Thurgood Marshall showed up on TV. And so the sort of predecessor to this clinic was all about like bring license challenges against these stations and allowing are helping the communities that broadcast basically go challenge and say, hey, our candidates are not getting on TV. They can't advertise. They can't participate in the process. So anyway, there's this long civil rights tradition. And when I started this fellowship, the first thing that landed on my desk, I don't know anything about disability law, but I got this rulemaking for Internet Protocol closed captioning, which is part of the this law that most folks I think have never heard of. It's the 21st Century Communications and Video Accessibility Act. It's kind of a 21st century update to the ADA, and among other things, it was the first law that really directly addressed having closed captions on the internet. And so I sort of inherited this rulemaking. It was like the first project that I did as a lawyer with this big coalition of deaf and hard of hearing folks, and kind of went down the rabbit hole. The CVAA has all these rulemakings that stretched on for 5 years. So I ended up just working at the FCC on these issues forever, and have kind of continued down that rabbit hole ever since. Sorry, did I answer both your questions?
Yeah, I think so. Scott, go ahead.
I'm sorry, did you want to go, GD? I didn't mean to. So that's really interesting. Were you saying that despite the fact that people who work in disability law normally have a personal relationship, were you saying that actually that wasn't the case with you, that it kind of just landed in your lap?
Yeah, exactly right. I that wasn't a career that I had pursued. I was kind of a telecom lawyer, copyright lawyer by training, and sort of landed in the subject matter area by happy accident, if that makes sense.
Do you think that makes you a stronger or weaker advocate, or perhaps it's neutral? Or
well, it's something I think carefully about all the time, and as a clinic professor, it's something I spend a lot of time talking with my students about, because many clinical students don't identify as being disabled either. It's one of the things that when we're working on behalf of a community, and I think this is true for anybody that does clinical advocacy, when we're working with and for a community that we're ourselves not part of, we have to think really carefully about what our role looks like in that situation, and how to be careful not to sort of insert our own perspectives and our own sort of views of situations, and present the sort of arguments that we feel instead of the communities. And it takes building relationships, and it takes careful listening and question asking and understanding to get to know what different communities are, what their preferences are, and how they feel about the issues that we're working on. But the one thing that I think is helpful is, I think I spend a lot of time in internet law contexts with folks like Kate, where we're talking about these broader internet law topics, and I think it can be helpful to be kind of a bridge between disability communities and the broader sort of set of internet law issues, which don't often pick up on disability and accessibility themes. And so to understand, hey, what we're talking about over at the FCC when we're talking about closed captioning actually has all these relationships with, reform of big tech, or content moderation, or censorship, and all the sorts of things that we argue about over there. So I think it can be really helpful, but negotiating that relationship is something I think about all the time, and it's kind of a constant.
So one of the things you mentioned are the relationships with the different communities, and different communities, as you said, have different preferences. Do you find at times that the different communities have perspectives that are at odds with one another, especially in terms of content moderation, and how do you balance the equities?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think for students that come into the work for the first time, I think there's and frankly, for a lot of policymakers and a lot of folks we work with, they sort of think of like the disability community as a monolithic community, as though there is only one, and that's really not the case, right? people with different disabilities and different combinations of disabilities and different sorts of categories of disabilities within broader categories, or people with multiple disabilities. There are lots of kind of complex and rich and overlapping communities, and folks totally come to the table with different perspectives, different values, different understandings of how to approach accessibility problems, and different perspectives on what kind of language we should be using, and different ideas about how to sort of tackle these problems. So for sure there are conflicts and differences in how people approach these issues. I like to think about, there's this case that I always have my students read called MPA v FCC, and the details don't matter, but it's this case where the broadcasters and the movie studios and the cable companies are suing the FCC over these audio description rules. Audio description is kind of a parallel to closed captioning for folks who are blind or visually impaired. It's reading visually what's happening on the screen, kind of describing it aloud. And so the FCC passed some rules, and there was a lawsuit over it, and the kind of three most prominent blind organizations were actually split on it and were on opposite sides of the litigation, with two of the organizations joining with the FCC and two of the organizations joining with the broadcasters and the movie studios. And the details are not important, but to say, like, negotiating those coalitions and making sure everybody's on the same page is not always easy, right? There are lots of things that can lead to that fracturing. And I think that's part of movement lawyering in general, right? Coalitions are always fragile, right? You've always got to get people to, sort of see past the differences or work past the differences and say, this is the sort of common ground that we share. And it doesn't always work, right? So yeah, that's a constant negotiation as well.
So I mean, it kind of seems like every advocacy movement has a split in it. Or has many fissures in it, but can you explain a little bit more, like, are there clear demarcations or like relatively clear demarcations within like the disability and accessibility rights movement that like are invisible to the rest of us who aren't immersed in this world? Like, it doesn't even occur to me like kind of where where the split would be of like two different disability groups like advocating on different sides of, like, it seems, and I know this is naive, but like it seems like a straightforward pitch, and so I'm just kind of curious what you think.
Yeah, and I mean that's a pretty exceptional case. I think usually it's not thinking about disagreements as much as how to set priorities, right? And different communities have different needs, and there are a huge number of accessibility challenges, right? So if we think about accessibility on the internet, right? We talked about closed captions, obvious priority for the deaf and hard of hearing community. Think about audio description and website accessibility, screen reader compatibility as issues that the blind and visually impaired community often advocate about. Often folks get left out of the conversation from the cognitive and intellectual disability communities in terms of the use of algorithms in ways that discriminate, right? That's another one. Increasingly, as we start to think about augmented reality, virtual reality, you're going to think about physical and mobility disability communities that get left out of those conversations. Just to give you another one, thinking about the shift over the course of the pandemic to video conferencing, like what we're doing here. That's a huge boon for people who are immunocompromised and identify as disabled as a result of that, or have other disabilities for which like working from home is something they've been advocating for 20 years, right? And constantly been denied it. Now it's normalized. But then it's a huge problem for folks who are deaf or hard of hearing, or can be a huge problem for folks who are deaf or hard of hearing, because a video conferencing platform doesn't have closed captions, right? So there are all these questions about, how do we spread all the sort of limited advocacy resources, and how do we address all of these multifarious problems, which are often not addressed by the market? How do we deal with them, and how do we prioritize them, and how do we get the industry to come up up with solutions, and all those kinds of questions are. So I think it's less conflict. I think it's pretty rare we come across it and think, boy, there's only one. We can only solve this in a way that works for one community and not another. But a lot of times it's like there's just more barriers than we have the resources to deal with, and so it's what gets prioritized and what gets attention, and that's, I think, kind of the hard part.
So I was wondering if you could, I know it's probably a hard thing to do, but identify what you think is like the biggest like hole, lacuna, scandal.
I like lacuna. That's our preferred term over here.
Okay, right. In terms of how we as a society accommodate or not accommodate the disabled.
I mean, I think the biggest like overarching thing that I see is, I don't know if you want to call it a lack of education or a lack of understanding, but when we think about the kind of discrimination that Kate and I often talk about when we're talking about online platforms in general, we're talking about whether it's platforms deciding what kind of speech to allow on, or algorithmic discrimination that results in disparate impacts for different kinds of communities, that kind of thing. We're generally thinking about like overt discrimination, right? We're talking about a platform taking specific steps to, whether we're arguing about conservative bias by the platforms or, hate speech or whatever. We're talking about active sort of discrimination most of the time. And I think when we talk about accessibility, we're talking about a kind of discrimination that's almost never overt or never like on purpose. Yeah. It's unintentional, right? And it's like we never thought of that, or we didn't know about that, or when we were making this product, like it never occurred to us that that's a problem. And from a like discrimination theory perspective, it's just as bad, right? Like the consequences are just as bad, but I think the interventions look a little different, because it's like most folks that you talk to, that are working in tech companies, you kind of have this conversation and they're like, oh, we didn't realize this. We didn't think about this. And they go through these kind of stages of realizing the shortcomings in their approach. And I think for the most part, they eventually get religion on the problems, right? They eventually get to a point where they say, oh, we need to take accessibility seriously. We need to start working it into our products. But the question is, how do we filter that down to all the startup companies? How do we filter that down to computer science education? How do we filter that down to everywhere else that technology is being developed? And it's a really hard set of questions. So I think that sort of, how do you get people to embrace this early in the life cycle of products and services is a really challenging problem.
Would you? I'm sorry. Just would you? This is a terrible question to ask someone, but I'm going to ask it anyway. Did you just?
I was frozen on mine, so did I take myself away? There, I'm back.
Oh, you
yes.
Cool.
Oh, sorry.
Okay.
I was like, oh no, I was like,
I won't ask. Okay, I won't.
It's such a terrible question. I have to go away.
You have to hide.
Ask an easier question then. Okay.
Or ask your harder one. It's okay.
No.
It was about elliptical curves, but
so,
let me ask you do you think that thinking about the United States of America, do you think we do an adequate job with accessibility, or do you think it's compared to other developed comparable countries, we're lacking or sorely lacking?
Yeah, that's a really good question. The elliptical curve one would have been easier.
Right, I know.
I'm a computer scientist too by training, so we could talk about cryptography if you want.
Okay.
I think it's a hard question because different countries take different approaches, and I think there are different places of strength and different places of weakness. You know, I think about I think about this less comparatively between, you know, what country is doing the best, and I more think about what are we doing compared to what we need, and how do we set the standard of what we need. I kind of think about equitable access, and equitable access to what. I think about all of the platforms and services and products and devices that we sort of use in contemporary society. And it could be for employment, right? Or so we could be talking about economic opportunities, or it could be opportunities to participate in the democratic process, right? To vote and to receive information, be educated. It could be to create and contribute creativity into society. And you know, we could go through the sort of list of stuff. And you know, I think we do an okay job. We certainly are better off than where we were before the ADA was passed and before the Rehab Act was passed. We have kind of come a long way since then. But we're always like, I always kind of think we're like 5 years behind, right? We are finally getting accessibility right for the technologies that were sort of mature 5 years ago. And getting ahead of that curve, I think, has been a real challenge, and maybe a unique challenge in America because we drive so much innovation worldwide, right? So many of the platforms that we use, you know, as folks have attributed to Section 230 and all of that sort of thing, like start here in the United States. And so I think we're always trying to play catch up, and I think that's the one piece that we have kind of figured out as a movement, is like how to get ahead of the curve, how to get innovators to be thinking about accessibility as part of the like minimum viable product, or whatever you want to call it.
Do you find that the conversations generally around content moderation for specific communities are more nuanced than the broader conversations that we have as a nation at large? Because I'm asking because you brought up 230, and that seems to be everyone's favorite punching bag.
Yeah. No, I don't know. I want to take any swings at 230, but yeah, I mean, I think
I've indoctrinated GDF very well. She is my former student in property, mind you, but like.
Wait, I'm sorry, what's the cool position? Are we pro 230 or anti 230?
I think the cool position is to not care about Section 230. Just be like let it roll off.
Section 230 is last year's thing.
Yeah, we're
it's uncool just even talking about it.
Until you need a soundbite on the news.
Yeah, exactly.
It's like Kofifi. That's not like a funny joke.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. Well, like, okay, so sorry, I want you to let you like answer, but like one of the things that Blake and I think align on is to the point about kind of limited resources is the amount of like air that Section 230 debates suck out of the room, when it is like literally just kind of basically taking, it's like, imagine if there was like, you know, we have like kind of torts suits that got us cars to have like seatbelts in them and like all kinds of safety measures. Like the internet has gotten there with some level of safety measures without that kind of tort liability mechanism. And it's like, would now imposing that tort liability mechanism make cars better? Like, I don't know. Like, would it make the internet better? Like, unclear. Like, there's just kind of I don't know. I just think that I think it answers a lot fewer questions. I think that Blake, I don't know if I want to speak for you, but like, answers.
Yeah, no, I find the debate over Section 230 to be kind of distracting on some level, because it occupies, I think, so much of the discourse around tech policy. And I think one side of why Section 230 is awfully overwrought, I think you always hear, well, your beef is not with Section 230, it's with the First Amendment, right? And it's really the First Amendment that is causing all these problems.
That's exactly right.
I think
they hate our freedom.
Yeah, I mean, there's the kind of libertarian version of that. I think the sort of progressive version of the problem with 230 is like, Yeah, 230 might hypothetically get in the way, but we actually haven't thought or pushed to apply all of the sort of laws, civil rights laws, among others, that we applied in the pre-internet world to the internet. And what do the contours of that look like? And what do we mean when we say don't discriminate on the internet? And accessibility is one place where it's like, what non-discrimination means is actually really complicated. It's building something, and I kind of look at Section 230. I'm like, that just doesn't even like begin to sort of answer the questions, other than sort of letting tech companies off the hook for some aspects of it in a way that's not all that helpful. But it's also not like the biggest problem, if that makes any sense.
Yeah. But can we get back to disability?
Yeah.
Because we were so GDF. Could you repeat your question? I don't feel like I.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah, sorry, I got out.
Sorry.
No, my question was, do you find that the conversations around content moderation are more nuanced within the specific communities, particularly because there's advocacy on specific points?
Yeah, so I mean, this is I think about like my role in these conversations. I get anxious about like commenting on the culture of communities. I feel like your question is sort
That's
of
fair.
rooted in what how do different communities approach that. I will just say there are hugely active subcultures on all of the major platforms where issues facing all of the disability communities get litigated and get debated. And I think a lot of the conversations about language, how do we talk about disability as an identity? How do we talk about the right way to refer to these things? All those sorts of questions, I think, get litigated on these platforms in in the same way that I guess all of our cultural questions kind of get mediated through or filtered through these platforms. I feel a little anxious, like being too much more detailed than that. Just I feel like it's kind of out of place, but yeah.
I was going to ask like a really hard hitting question about the deaf community, which was like very actually.
Does it involve elliptical curves?
No. We sure? Last chance, Scott.
No.
Okay.
Oh,
yeah.
We could have spent the next hour on elliptical curves. We'll ask. Go ahead, Kate.
I was gonna say that, like, so anyway, so Rochester, where I grew up, has the RIT has a really profound and actually like a number of my cousins, or like my second cousins, I guess, whatever that is, but are deaf, and there is a very profound community of like the deaf community is very large and active in Rochester, and then there is this huge debate around cochlear implants and that kind of issue. And I was thinking like that type of debate has always been really, I've like never really understood it entirely. And that, so I'm not expecting you to explain it to me, but I was going to say, you can answer that question, or you can talk about whether or not you are disabled as a genetic non-taster, which is why you like ketchup so much. So those are your choices. And so, yeah. So if for those of you who don't know, Blake has, which you should follow him on Twitter. He is hilarious. But Blake has a love of ketchup that is preternatural and amazing. And he puts it on everything. And like he made this incredible video at the beginning of the pandemic of him making a ketchup cake. I kid you not. It was like a cake with ketchup, and it had like a half a cup of ketchup in it, right? You said it was like normal tasting now.
I'm gonna just
like
spoil
a sweet cake.
I'm gonna spoil your introduction of the ketchup,
like a red velvet cake
topic, and answer your first question first.
Really? Cochlear implant question is better.
I was going to say, like, honestly, I did not know about this. Why we've been talking about disability when we could have been talking about
ketchup?
I mean, and this video. I mean, look, I know this all the stuff. So this is okay. Answer the question, but please for God's sakes.
We'll circle back to the ketchup. And
We've got 27 minutes. I promise I'll find my way back. So on that first question, just for folks that are not familiar with that debate, I again want to be like careful in how I characterize it, but there's a debate among in the community, and I think it kind of gets into the folks who identify as deaf, like capital D deaf, as part of their identity, and what it means to get a cochlear implant versus, and I don't think these things are necessarily in opposition, but do you sort of not do that and embrace the using ASL and not getting a cochlear implant, and I think I'll just say that it kind of feeds back into this long running characterization of disability under what we call the medical model, right? Which is like to treat disability as a condition to be cured. And what scholars have supplanted that with, and again, I'm like way oversimplifying here, so please forgive me if they're experts in the room on this, but we replace it with a social model, right? Where we think of disability as a function of social barriers, right? In other words, that society has constructed activities and services and things people do and products and so forth in ways that are inaccessible to them, and so that to think about a disability as a medical condition is really like letting society off the hook, right? And it's treating a person with a disability as the problem, when really the problem is with society, right? So I think cochlear implants sort of get to the heart of that, right? Because it's like it is medicalization on some level, right? It's sort of saying like deafness is a thing that can be overcome with this technological, call it a device or widget or whatever, and how do we feel about that, and how does the community feel about that? So I don't have any like answer to that question other than to say like it's a really, I think, important conversation, and maybe a more contemporary one. I would love to like plug the work of Liz Jackson at Elise Jackson on Twitter. She is super rad. I think she lives in your neck of the woods, Kate. She's an accessibility activist, and she's coined the term disability dongle. Have you guys ever heard this one? The idea of like we're going to solve an accessibility problem by like creating this device that a person with a disability is going to use to like navigate around the societal barrier. And so the classic one is like people will come up with these, like instead of building a ramp up to a building that you can use any wheelchair on, people will create these like really elaborate, like tank looking like robot wheelchairs to climb upstairs, right? That are like totally impractical.
The Boston Dynamics things and stuff.
Yeah, all that kind of stuff, right? Or it's like, or let's use augmented reality to put captions over people's faces, like those kind of things. So encourage folks who find these dynamics interesting, like go check out Liz. She's a good chronicler of the like disability dongle dynamic and how that like sort of centers like medicalization, and rather than thinking about social barriers as the problem. So that's a good resource there. All right, let's get to catch up. Do you want to like restate the question?
Yeah. Okay. So I really like. Okay. So
like, what do you really want to know?
When did it all begin? What was like? There was a moment on Twitter. I think it was before the pandemic, but then it definitely accentuated in lockdown, in which you were just like the ketchup king, and there was kind of like, and you would post these controversial videos of like a bowl of edamame and tuna fish and corn and
that was a later one, and there wasn't any.
What
corn
the fuck
in it.
was that? And it was like drizzled with ketchup, like the sauce was ketchup, and like people were horrified.
That one was really upsetting. I don't know why people got so upset. I think it was because I used like
on tuna fish, like tomato and tuna.
It wasn't that. It was because it was like it was really like well lit and it was kind of glossy, and I used like the vivid filter, so it was like really bright red ketchup and like really bright yellow mac and cheese and like really bright green.
Oh, there was mac and cheese. I forgot the mac
Yeah.
and cheese. So silly of me. The mac and cheese and tuna and edamame and corn, all in this thing, drizzled with ketchup. No, Blake, it had
Yeah,
nothing
people were
to do
like
with the
legit
filter.
upset about that one. Yeah, that was-
Nothing to do with the filter.
I just went and immediately followed you, but like,
Yes.
because like, how is this? How is it the case that I'm finding out about this right now? Because this is genius. You are a person way ahead of your
It's not a
time.
bit though, Scott. He
Well,
actually
no, I mean-
eats the stuff.
okay, so like let's
even
correct the
better.
record. Like it's kind of a bit, right? So like I kind of had this realization, and I actually like I really love this about Twitter. Like I find this to be like an endearing feature of Twitter, that there's certain topics, and it's like pick any area of pop culture, but like food especially, where people will just like get hyper upset and like amped about their opinions about
Paella.
something.
Paella.
Right?
It was
Like
I was like this close to being canceled.
Wait,
yeah, right. Like
Oprah,
like
what
that would
was
be
your
the perfect.
paella take?
That would be
There's
the perfect
paella
troll. Like
tape?
Denver has the best paella, right?
You're-
Like, there's-
No, I said that paella was, I thought, the most over. Paella is very.
Oh, I
good.
do remember you saying this, and it was
Oh,
really
yeah.
interesting,
And
controversial.
the hatred that
yeah, it just
I got.
Scott, even restating that, you're living on the edge.
I know.
No.
I feel very safe here because I don't put ketchup on everything, though I'm a huge ketchup fan. And I think, although I don't do this, and I think of it as a character flaw, ketchup on pasta is good.
What the
Oh,
actual
yeah.
fuck is wrong with you people?
yeah. All right, on mac and cheese, like
Yeah, or
this is-
mac and cheese is extremely good, but that's like so decadent that I can't even do it.
Oh, okay, so here's
Run off
the
and
thing
get
that
married
happens, and
together.
and, like, the
this
pie-
is like Rick Santorum's nightmare. It's like two men running off and getting married and putting ketchup on everything.
on paella, perhaps, right?
I
Like maybe that would make it better. I don't know.
That's the thing is, when I hear Santorum, I don't think ketchup.
Oh yeah, the Dan Savage thing. Oh, yeah.
I know.
Yeah, so like, well, actually, like what just happened here is like the perfect reason why this got funny, because I realized there's like 3 or 4 of these topics that are just perennial like fire starters for people, and they just like bring out the passion, right? And it's ketchup, bagels, pizza, like those 3, and there's some others. Like paella is a great one. Like Scott, you're really like innovating on this front.
Can I say something? The most engagement I ever got from a tweet was when I had them vote on the best rice. Okay. Oh, actually, okay.
Yeah, rice is a good one too.
Right.
I love that.
But the thing is, okay. I'm going to see if you can get the right answer here. I gave 4 choices. Okay. It was.
Well, a poll is a good way to do it. Yeah.
Yeah, right. It was a poll because it's objective and scientific, right? So there's paella, biryani, fried rice.
Biryani's good. Yeah.
Yeah, fried rice or risotto.
Mm.
Yeah. So I didn't.
Who won?
Don't tell me which one you picked. Tell me, and both Kate and Blake, you should be able to get the right answer because who? So let me say it again, okay? Biryani, risotto,
Fried rice, risotto.
fried rice, paella.
Well, isn't risotto like not rice or something?
No,
Isn't
it's
there?
no, it's rice. It's just like a certain type of rice. Wait, what?
Oh, it's the other way around. It's
what
not
about
pasta.
those? Like, which
Yeah.
one do we not like, or which one do we like the most?
No, because the thing is, so I got 22,000 votes. Which is that is a crazy for one day. One day it was a one day of 22,000. But there's only one answer that's the obvious right answer. That's the obvious.
What was the question about the 4 things, though?
Okay, what is the best rice dish?
Oh,
Yeah, I don't know. Those all sound good. Like, what's the
Oh
what's
my
the
God! You know
what's the
what?
inside track?
This is upsetting
John would say fried rice.
Oh my God! You know what? You all are disappointing me so bad, because
you say
because we're thinking about who's voting here. So China, the Chinese, they're not in this. Okay, they're on a different. They're on.
I thought you were just asking my opinion. You were asking me to guess what won.
Yeah, what won?
Yeah, okay.
Gotcha.
That's why I kept saying over and over again. What won?
Yeah.
So China fried rice is out. Okay, paella. They locked down Valencia and half of Barcelona and Madrid, but like that's a small number. Risotto is the right answer, but how many, like kind of coastal Americans / Mediterranean Italians are there? Substantial, but then how many Indians are there? So that's
interesting.
So
is biryani?
Biryani crushed, and I think it's because of like internet access and just
that's so interesting
demographics.
Well, see, this is like if you had a little bit more control over your study, you would be able to know because you would have gotten secondary demographic information, Scott. So way to fuck it up. But
did you put the real question is, did you run this through the IRB before you put out this? This is deep human subject research.
I ran it through the LRB, the London Review of Books, and they were very confused.
That's also that's good.
They love biryani there. It's like it's like the only thing that's edible in London. Yeah.
So I feel like I've walked like I'm outclassed on this with Scott being here. Like Scott is the master of this kind of trollery. Like paella is the pinnacle of this kind of troll. Yeah. But like if you put out a question that's or something that's like even remotely controversial, right? Like pineapple on pizza, or like bagels are the same, or like especially if you insult like New York bagels.
That is okay.
But like it's besides the point, right? Like it's just a way to like get people to get excited about their thing, or like about how grape nuts are good. Like that's another easy one. People get really upset about grape nuts.
But again, I'm going back to like you. I want you to answer the question: have you ever been tested to be a genetic non-taster? So
I do have the genetic thing with cilantro. Like cilantro tastes like dish soap. I can't eat cilantro, so I don't know if that contributes.
Maybe it's true. Are you like that too, Scott?
No, I'm not. But I really don't want us to medicalize this.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, well, that's true. We shouldn't medicalize it. But I'm just gonna say, yeah. So I have a friend who's a genetic super taster. Like she actually got tested and she can taste like xanthan gum in like any food or like all of those types of like.
Oh, that's brutal.
So she like really liked this ice cream, and then they added xanthan gum to make it like kind of like a slightly better consistency. She can like just taste it very strong and like whatever. I know. I'm kind of like I'm glad that is not my lot in life. But then like. Okay, so I have to go. We have to go to Paula's question, but I'm just gonna like put this out there that there was this one conversation. It might have been a metaphor for something, but John and I were having a conversation. He was like, "What if your best possible meal, like the meal that brought you the most utils, was lobster? And like then what if your meal that brought you the most utils was ramen, like 99 cents or 10-cent ramen? Like if you were a person that would have ramen and that would make you just as happy as if you had had lobster, you are actually kind of in a better position in life than like all of the people who like need lobster in order to like get like this kind of like get this level to reach this height of satisfaction." And I kind of thought that this was like, I actually think about this a lot in relation. I mean, anyways, sorry. It's probably some philosophical concept I've never heard of, but
I mean, I reject this form of economic analysis, but you could probably put ketchup on both of those things. I don't know if that is helpful.
Why?
So I have a relative who's Canadian, who does put ketchup on lobster. But I would say,
It's like a lobster roll, right? It's like the Maine hot dog. It's like a Chicago
Okay.
dog, but
Stop it, Blake.
what's the?
I'm gonna mute you, Blake.
But, okay, but I have to point out the thing that Scott just did there, and he's done it with both of the things. Is every time I post one of these things, it gets like even ratio, right? Like people get so upset about it, but then there's always this like little people are like, yeah, like I like ketchup on that, or like, yeah, grape nuts is like my favorite cereal, and I'm like, it's not me, right? I'm just
that's my favorite cereal too.
yeah. Do you like it hot or cold?
It's served hot.
I'm sorry.
What actual fuck?
I'm sorry. I'm sorry if you saw me throw up in my mouth. When you said,
no, I'm talking. So
I don't
you guys
wanna
can't
ask,
try
like,
this because
why
there's
you
a
make it hot. Like, how do you make it hot? Do you like
no,
add
it's really
milk?
easy. So you can't try this because there's a grape nut shortage right now. So it's really hard to get grape nuts unless you know like what grocery stores like get them. But yeah, you put it in a bowl, like a little bit of milk, a little bit of honey, or like whatever else you want to add to it, and then 30 seconds to the microwave. It's delicious.
Blake has his entire trunk is just like garbage bags filled with grape nuts. And he's just like scooping
Does
them
it become
out.
like a
I feel like in New York you gotta
like measuring
like
them
that,
into baggies and like handing it off.
You know that episode of Seinfeld where Kramer goes to get like the shower heads from the van? I feel like you got to find the grape nuts van.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. Say
Yeah,
that.
you got to go to the grape nuts van.
We're totally Alicing Paula. Poor Paula. Also,
Totally.
Paula's flinching. Also, Paula is mentioning Tomb, which I made from scratch, and I gave some to Scott, and it was so good.
It's so good.
It is. Hi, Paula.
So can I share my little Tomb thing before I ask my question?
Of course.
So I was in Lebanon when I was little, and my Lebanese cousins were like, we need to show you something that tastes amazing. And I'm like, they're going to show me like a really good Lebanese dish. And these like little shits like showed me ketchup with Tomb, and they're like, this is what we eat. And I was like, I came from across the world, and you showed me. Like it was one of the most insane.
But did they
Let me change your life.
Did they cook it for you on a countertop and then like kind of like
It's really good, by the way. Ketchup with Tomb with your French fries is amazing. But my actual question is, when you're talking about these issues from an advocacy standpoint, is it better to
ketchup or the other stuff?
No, the other stuff.
Okay.
Is it better to talk about it as a general societal issue where these are basic things that we should have that everyone benefits from, and then it just so happens that there's a class of people who benefit more from or need them? Or is it better to specifically point out a class of people that this is designated for?
It's a super fascinating question. I mean, gosh, you could take it in a bunch of different directions. I guess like what comes to mind for me there is I'm always really mindful or nervous about like means testing or proving like things that require proving disability. And there's a scholar you should have on the show, Doran Dorfman is an amazing.
Yeah. I saw that you're speaking with him at an ISP event soon. I did, and I've seen his stuff, and I was like wondering about him. So yeah, we should have him on.
Yeah, so Doran, just to like tease everybody with it, is like the fear of the disability con, right? And he does all this really interesting empirical stuff. And his thesis, he sort of examines this notion that people are really suspicious of disability, right? And so if there's something like a parking spot that's reserved for people with disabilities close to the front of the lot, or he looks at like the line at Disney World, if you have a disability, you can get to the front of the line faster, those kind of things. He analyzes like the suspicion that people have about, is this person who is using this really disabled or not, right? So I'm always a little bit anxious about anything that requires like means testing or proving that you have a disability, because there's often these like life admin costs that come along with proving that, and these privacy violations that come along with having that. And it's important, I think, to like start from, we talk about it as like universal design. Can we make as many things as accessible to as many people as possible? Like, that's a really good starting point. On the other hand, there are some things that are really personalized, right? That do, that need to work for people specifically because of their disability or their combination of disabilities and their needs, right? So somebody might need a communication facilitator to help them, to sign on through a relay service, or they might need to customize something in particular way, or they might need an individualized education plan or whatever. So I think like we should make affordances for our room for customization and that kind of thing when we need it, but also we got to start with precepts of universal design and try as hard as we can up front to be as accessible as we can, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, totally. So we have 7 minutes left, and I'm sure we could fill it all up with ketchup, but Mike Tolhurst, who is a disembodied voice, has a great question. Hi, Mike.
Hello. Good to see everybody. And I have to say, in terms of filter bubbles, I missed the ketchup discourse. On right of center discourse, it was mayo on hot dogs. That was
mayo is such an obvious, I feel like mayo's old.
Okay.
Right?
Okay.
Like
mayo is
not
the 230
literally,
of controversial food discourse.
Yeah, we're just ignoring it like it doesn't exist.
Seriously, let's
although there is did you guys see this thing about fry sauce today? The Spokane pizza. Do you guys know about Spokane pizza?
No, I mute things on Twitter.
Go look up Spokane pizza. It's raw. It's like super thick, like pizza dough. You top it with fry sauce, which is ketchup and mayo, and you debate like what the proper proportion is. Then you do raw green peppers, onions, canned salmon, melted mozzarella, and then you put strawberries on the top. And I think authentic Spokane pizza, you also put pineapple on to sort of balance it out. And then more fry sauce after it's baked on the top.
So
anyway, couldn't let the mayo discourse go by.
Okay, sorry. I do want Mike. You had a question before.
Yes, I had
before the nightmare fuel.
The semi-serious question is take it as you will. If you're an accessibility-minded Elon Musk and you have $3 billion to take over Twitter or some other company, what are the quixotic pro-accessibility things that you would try to do? What is the company and what are the things you would be doing?
All right, I'm gonna skip it. I'm gonna accept I'm not gonna fight the premise of an accessibility-minded Elon Musk. I feel like Elon Musk is kind of a little bit self-absorbed, and this question might not occur to him. But I'll take the question because
not.
I know, shots fired, right?
Elon Musk is he's like our Da Vinci.
I think R is doing a lot of work there, or Da Vinci, or maybe both. But okay, that is a fantastic question. Seriously, what would if we really got to sort of turn the knobs up on accessibility with an unlimited amount of money? That's a great question, because money is often sort of the barrier. So the biggest thing I think about on social media platforms is authoring tools, and actually Twitter has been doing fantastic work on this with alt text recently. So next time you're on Twitter, you can actually now see if people have put alt text on an image, and you can click the little alt button or tap it depending on what platform you're on, and actually see what other people are doing with alt text. And suddenly it's everybody gets to see that as part of the content, at least if they go to the trouble. So people are going to get better at writing alt text. Not only are they going to be more likely to do it, but they're going to see it. So that's pretty cool. But I think these kind of authoring tool questions are the place where a lot of money could get spent. What sort of nudging, what sort of friction can you add when people are posting a tweet, or I'm old, I don't know what the right verb is for TikTok, when they what do you do to a TikTok to instantiate? You tick it? Are you setting me up with that? I
Yeah,
don't believe you.
I don't know.
All right, so when you materialize a TikTok, however that happens, like, are you prompted to add closed captions to it, right? Like, are you do you get sort of nudged along the way to do that? I think those kind of features are the kind of thing where if I could go and wave a magic wand at all the big like social companies and like Twitter in particular, and there are awesome folks at Twitter, like Twitter has started to get religion on this for sure. But to say like, just keep putting the pedal to the floor on authoring tools, and every time you're experimenting with, you know, they did a good job with this with spaces. They added auto captions to spaces, that kind of thing. But every time you kind of think of a new medium where people are authoring stuff, how can you turn that up to the max to make sure they're making it accessible to the broadest number of people? That's a great question.
I love this answer though too, because it gives me something to take into all my meetings with people at the companies and be like, you want to do something that is not going to cost you a ton of like, or like it might cost you a lot.
But it is like there is cost though, right? It's
like,
extra friction.
But there is a huge avenues we've talked about a lot, Blake. There's a huge avenue in which content moderation workers are being cycled out for algorithmic and AI types of like things. And so like repurposing people to write thoughtful captions or to write alt text for things is like really great. Like that would be a great repurposing of human labor. Like I think that's like and it's like less costly than like having them stare at like decapitated humans all the time. Like,
or even do like a Wikipedia version and like you can correct incorrect closed captioning like as a viewer instead of having.
Yeah,
that's a great point.
It's a great idea, right? Although then you start to get into the content moderation issues and vandalism and all of that kind of stuff for the accessibility features. Like,
yeah, but what about Section 230?
It comes up, right? I mean, there are starting to be cases around, you know, can you get held liable for the inaccessibility of third-party content? It is a 230 question for sure. But I think the ultimate goal of all this stuff is to get people who are authoring stuff, and that's everybody on Twitter, to think about who is in my audience, who am I communicating with? And it's not just if I don't have a disability, it's not just, you know, people who don't have disabilities. It's like there might be folks who are deaf or hard of hearing, there might be folks that are blind or visually impaired, might be folks who are have a cognitive or intellectual disability, and like I want to communicate with them, and I want my content to be, you know, experienced by them, and I likewise want to engage with creators with disabilities. So I think it's like bringing the sort of creative, you know, energy around all these platforms and making accessibility part of that.
It's a great point. I like also just want to say that like there are moments I think in cultural history that do generate like sua sponte empathy that people are like forcing people out. So there was a moment many years ago that no one probably remembers but me, but like all of the photos on Instagram got replaced by alt text. And it was just like a bug that happened for everyone. And everyone was kind of like, why am I looking at dog picture? Like, or cat picture, like that's all it said.
You get the bad like auto described ones.
Yeah, you're like, well, this is shitty. This doesn't even marginally describe what's going on in the picture. And then like the other moment is like all of the proliferation of TikTok meant that there were so many people lying in bed while their partner is sleeping and they wanted to watch these TikTok videos and they didn't have headphones in and they still wanted to know what's going on. So like the captioning of things and like the auto voice type of recognition became like, or so for blind and deaf people became like these really de rigueur kind of like elements that TikTok just built into its infrastructure.
Yeah, so the positive externalities of accessibility, right?
100%. So I think it's a great kind of positive place to end on. But Blake, come back.
Can I make a plug before we go for everyone that's out there? No, well, yeah, put ketchup on everything. It's delicious. Check out my YouTube on that front. But no, go home tonight, like whatever platform you use for social or video, and try and turn on captions, try and turn on audio description, try and look at the alt text and try and, if you're not a person who uses those things on a regular basis, and check it out. And you will get a sense really fast of where things are okay and where things are have gaps. So really try and do that tonight.
Yeah, really absolutely wonderful, Blake. It was so great to see you. We're going to leave it there. We will be back on Friday. I don't know. Ben is out for Seder. I think it's Passover. Are you, I think that maybe, are you going to also be out, Scott? Maybe on Friday? I don't know. Anyways, we'll figure it out. There may or may not be a show. It might just
He's
be
getting
me and
paella.
Genevieve as like, I'm like the WASP and the Catholic. So like, it's just kind of like hanging out before Easter. But either way, we'll be back eventually. And we don't have fun anymore, but wait, hold on. I fucked it up. Wait, Scott, fix it. What did I have to say?
Yeah, we'll be back in many hours and less than 60 minutes from now. But until then, we can't have fun anymore. But GDF?
In lieu of fun, we have many, many condiments and a little bit of homework to turn on accessibility options on our platforms.
Bye-bye.
Bye,
everyone.
guys.
Thank you. It was great.
Bye, everyone.
Thanks, guys. It was nice to meet you, Scott.